Hey class, it's Professor Watzak. Welcome to week 6. As you can see, what I'm showing you on my screen right now is actually our week 6 lesson folder. As you can see here, I have already gone over here to the lessons part of our class. I clicked on lessons and then that lessons brings you, well, I can just show you right now. We go to lessons, of course. Scroll down. Oh, we see week 6, gender and identity. That is our week 6 lessons folder. We click on that. And here we are in the week 6 folder itself for gender and identity. And first we see here listed is the daily schedule. All right, so we have a bunch of readings right here that we're doing this week. The Complexity of Identity, Who Am I by Beverly Daniel Tatum. That's a really interesting article, actually, about how we form our own sense of identity and how society also helps us construct that sense of identity. In part, it comes through, of course, genetic components, but also environmental. And it's hard really to separate the two because none of us is born in a bubble, right? It's impossible to know how we would be without that social input. So Tatum actually examines kind of along the lines of what we've been studying already with Alan Johnson and his What is a System of Privilege essay. She examines various systems of privilege at work in our society. And she actually talks about 7 different categories. She basically talks about how our sense of identity or what occurs to us as what makes us who we are is how we differentiate ourselves from other people. In other words, um, who we are, our sense of identity is how we are different from other people. And she actually talks about 7 major categories of difference that we tend to perceive between ourselves and other people. And those categories of difference are things like age, race or ethnicity, uh, physicality, and also mental ability. So that would include um, how physically maybe fit you are, or how physically abled you are. Maybe, somebody might be blind or, deaf, or, somebody's like extraordinarily quick at memorizing. All of those things feed into that physical, mental prowess category. So we have age, race slash ethnicity, physical, mental ability. Um, let's see. We also have sex and gender as another category of difference. And then also socioeconomics, that's another category. So where we fall in terms of our financials, and like that also feeds into what communities we live in and things like that. You can just click on this article and take a look at it really fast. Oops, that didn't go there, did it? I don't know why it didn't, but let's go back. Um, Maybe this will get us there. No, that won't get us there either. Well, it's a linked file, but when we go into our week 6 readings, this is actually where all the readings are contained. Sometimes I link them on the schedule, but if the links don't work there, you can always come here to the week 6 readings where they're all located. And you see we have many readings we've got this week. Several of them are from the Intersections textbook. But if you don't have that textbook, I've actually pasted the reading from the Intersections textbook, essay by essay, into documents that you can click on and read here too. So let's click on the complexity of identity and take a look at that for a minute. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. And here she talks about, who am I? Multiple identities. She plays a little game with her students. She says, I am blank. And we actually did this in our class, kind of looked at this a little bit. I am blank. What occurs to you when you say I am blank? Some students, she said, will write I am black, or I am Puerto Rican, or I am Korean American. An interesting thing she notices, though, is that um, people tend to put, as I mentioned before, the categories of difference down. Those are the adjectives or the traits that occur to people the most when they're thinking, when they're playing this little game of who am I? You know, I am blank. What best describes, if you had to sit down for 60 seconds and write a list of adjectives, which ones would most describe you? And she says that people tend to write down those categories or traits or adjectives that distinguish them from other people. In other words, makes them seem different from other people. So, for example, if you're a member of a dominant group, that's not going to really make you different, right? Because it's the majority. And so you sort of take that for granted. It's a trait that, you share with many, many other people, and therefore it's not really distinguishing in your mind. What is distinguishing is something that maybe you alone have, or you feel special about, or you feel different from other people about. Um, and so some of that has to do with sexual orientation. Some of it has to do with age, gender, physical ability, socioeconomics, um, even ethnicity. Um, and she talks about how she she talks about actually systems of privilege, kind of along the lines of what Alan Johnson was talking about in his article, What is a System of Privilege? And she states that these systems of privilege are based on the 7 categories of difference, or whatever categories of difference you have from the dominant group versus the non-dominant groups. The dominant group would be the one that shares a particular set of characteristics, and they have privileges based on their sharing or possessing those traits that the majority have. And then the non-dominant group, or the targeted group, is the one that does not possess the same traits as the rest of the dominant group. So, for example, if you're in a situation where, say, age is the primary factor that's differentiating a majority group from a minority group, then those that are of the age that applies to the majority group would have more privileges. For example, suppose you're going to a bar and it's like a bar slash, I don't know, dance place. Those kinds of places are usually frequented by younger people, right? So if an older person, say somebody in their 60s, shows up, unless they have some sort of other um, characteristic of the dominant group, they may be, kind of shuttled out of the limelight. They may not have the privileges. They may not even be let in to that kind of a place. And I'm talking about like by bouncers and things like that, where you have the door controlled by people. So it's interesting how we think so much about the white system of privilege and minority racial and ethnic groups being discriminated against and not having the advantages that maybe the majority group has, or the dominant group um, of the white Caucasians in this country. However, there are other systems of privilege, of course, at play that, go off gender, sex, sexual orientation, age, socioeconomics. Um, the list could go on and on. You could really define a system of privilege based on many, many, many groups of dominance. But in America, we do run into the white system of privilege quite a bit. But depending on where you are and what you're doing, a different one could be at play as well. All right. So this is a very interesting read. She talks about her experience as being parts of several different non-dominant, in other words, targeted groups. from different types of systems of privilege. So this will be continuing on our discussions that we've already started, but branching out into different areas of domination and subordination and advantage and disadvantage. And, just gives you a little interesting way to think about identity, kind of similar to what we've discussed earlier in class, but getting into more detail. So she talks about who am I, who was I before, and who will I become. So that's kind of like present, who am I now, past, who was I before, and future, who will I become. So these are questions that actually occur to us either consciously or subconsciously and help us form our identity as well. And she says how these often occur to us at adolescence. All right, we're going to dive into a few more things here. You see, we've got a lot of readings from Intersections. Why we need to reimagine masculinity. My son wears dresses. Get over it. Field Guide to the Tomboy. High heels and pink. No way. A Life in Two Genders. And these are all going to be readings that are kind of continuing on our discussion from last week, which is on sex and gender, and how those two things may not be identical. We have previously thought of them as identical, but sociologists from the 1950s and forward started thinking, or maybe even the 1940s, but kind of that latter half of the 20th century. People started distinguishing these two things, saying, hey, your biological sex may not always add up to the gender that you feel like. And we did that summary last week about that from the Introduction to Sociology textbook on sex and gender, chapter 12.1. So you see how those two things may not always correlate. And then there's the other added layer of sexual orientation, which may provide another level of complexity to your identity. So these essays are discussing points of view where the sex and the gender don't necessarily always match up, and the kinds of feelings that come from that internally, and as well as feelings that you get in response to external messages that you're receiving from your community, whether those two things should agree, sexual and gender, or even those three things, sex, gender, and the sexual orientation. So these will be some really interesting reads and give you great food for thought for your assignment this week, your major writing assignment, which is the sex and gender free write. So now let me tell you about a free write. A free write is where it's not like the summary that we wrote last week, and it's not like the essay that we wrote the week before. It's actually a new type of writing activity. It's where you will just write on the topic of sex and gender, and this will help prep you for our essay number 2 that's coming up. But what it allows you to do is synthesize the concepts that you are getting and the experiences and reactions and responses you're having to all these different pieces that we're reading and the videos that we are watching both last week and this week. So basically, you will write your response to this. Now, last week, you wrote a summary, which is where you cannot put your personal reaction or response. You cannot put your personal feelings, thoughts, or connections into a summary. A summary is where you just state the facts. You say what the piece is saying in shorter terms. You sum it up in fewer words than the piece actually took to say what it was saying. So you just hit those main points and the main supporting points, and no thoughts of your own go into it other than your ability to distinguish those main points and supporting details. But this week is where you can actually talk about the main points and the supporting details and also give your opinions, thoughts, and reactions and connections to those. So you'll just write freely and you will fill up 2 pages of material. You don't have to worry about grammar, but let's write in sentences. But you don't have to get hung up on grammar and things like that or structure. You just kind of write. Write what you think about complexity of identity, and then after that, write what do you think about why we need to reimagine masculinity, and also the videos this week. Let's take a look at those. Here is our video folder, week 6 videos. We've got a couple. These are actually mainly talking about masculinity and social concepts of what boys and men should be like, and how the problems that creates for men and the binds that it puts them in, because it might not always match up to their internal feelings. So these are also good things to watch and react to include in your free write. So